Shabbat Shalom. This week's Parashah is Parshat Ekev, and in the Parashah, Moshe exhorts the people of Israel to remember God when they settle in the land, when they cross the river Jordan to settle in the land of Eretz Israel, to remember the blessings that God gave them, the miracles God wrought for them from when they left Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt, until they reached the borders of the Promised Land through 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. The fact that God gave them food, that God parted the sea of reeds for them, looked after them, led them with a pillar of cloud, a pillar of fire to their destination. We find one of the verse in this week's Torah portion, Devarim, chapter 8, verse 10. We have the source text for Birkat Hamazon. Birkat Hamazon, we thank God for the meal that you've just eaten. Our Christian brothers and sisters say grace before meals, we say grace after meals. Why after? Because this text verse says, V'achalta v'savata v'erachta et Adonai lehecha, you shall eat and be satisfied and bless eternal your God, al ha'aretz ha'tova asher natan lach, the good land which God has given you. So you first have to be satisfied before you bless God, thank God for the food. So we find in the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda teaches, where do we learn the idea of thanking God after eating? From this verse in the Torah portion. V'achalta v'savata v'erachta et Adonai lehecha, you shall eat to your full, be satisfied, and then you shall bless the eternal your God. Al ha'aretz ha'tova, for the good land, asher natan lach, which God has given you. Commentaries on the Mishnah, called the Tosefta, says, but where do we learn that you should say a blessing before we eat? We know that we say hamotzi lechem min ha'aretz before we eat our meal, as well as Birkat Hamazon afterwards. Where do you learn the idea that you should thank God before? Because it says, Asher natan lach, you shall bless God for the good land that God has given you. The idea is that as soon as God gives you, you should take a blessing. So we see the food on the table, God has given us the food. Yes, we have processed many of the foods to make it edible, and we thank God for that before we eat, and then we follow the Mishnah, which teaches we should thank God after we eat as well. It goes on further and says, where do we learn the idea that when you see the wonderful wonders of nature, high mountains and hills, that you should say a blessing? From the same verse, Al ha'aretz ha'tova, for the good land which God has given you. So when you see the wonders of nature, you should give a blessing, say a blessing, thanking God. Where do you get the idea that you should say a blessing before we read Torah, which will be read tomorrow morning, or studying Torah? A blessing is also said for studying Torah, which Raphael will lead us in tomorrow morning. Where do you get that idea from? From the words Asher natan lach, that which God has given you, because the same verb to give is mentioned in the book Shmot, the book of Exodus, where it says, V'etna lacha et luchot ha'avim, that I will give you the tablets of stone. So we learn from this one single verse in a Torah portion, V'achalta v'savata v'erachta et Adonai lehecha, you shall eat and be satisfied and bless the eternal your God, al ha'aretz ha'tova asher natan lach, for the good land which God has given you. We learn we should say a blessing before we eat, say a blessing after we eat, say a blessing in seeing the wonders of nature. You say a blessing before reading or studying Torah. If you look at Birkat Hamazon, it's made up essentially of 4 brachot, 4 blessings, and then rabbis added other things to it as well to make it even longer. That's why when people say let's bench, people suddenly say, I've got to go now, and you have an empty room. The first bracha thanks God for the food that we have eaten. According to tradition, that bracha was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, because during Moshe's time leading the Israelites in the wilderness, God fed the Israelites with manna, with man. The second blessing, thanks God for the good land that you have, the land of Israel. And according to tradition, that blessing was written by Yehoshua bin Nun, Joshua, who led the Israelites across the river Jordan to settle the land. The third blessing blesses God and asks God to look after Yerushalayim, that it be a city of peace. Yerushalayim, the center of the land of Israel, the capital of Hamelech David's empire. Tradition says that blessing was written by Hamelech David, King David, and his son Hamelech Shlomo, King Solomon. And then the fourth blessing gives thanks to God for God's goodness, Hatov Meitiv. And that, according to tradition, was written by the rabbis of Yavne. Yavne was a small village to which Yochanan ben Zakkai fled from Jerusalem when he saw that inevitable would happen, that the Romans were going to conquer Jerusalem and destroy everything that it stood for. He smuggled himself out of Jerusalem and he established a school in Yavne. And that school became the founding place of rabbinic Judaism, of Judaism that we practice today, Judaism without a Beit Mikdash, without a temple. And the legend is that after the second Jewish revolt against the Romans, led by Shimon bar Kokhba, he was a political leader, and the spiritual leader was Rabbi Akiva. He led a rebellion which lasted from 132 to 135 of a common era. And that rebellion was put down by the Romans. The Romans besieged Bar Kokhba and his army at a place called Beitar, which many are familiar with. Those of us old enough to remember the Beitar movement remember that they got the name from Beitar, a village just outside Jerusalem. And the Romans slaughtered them all, but did not allow the Jews to bury the bodies until a decree was made years later to allow the Jews to retrieve the corpses of Shimon bar Kokhba and his soldiers and bury them. And so the rabbis composed this blessing, thanking God for God's goodness, allowing this to happen. Food is very important to all. We thank God for the food that we have just eaten in the first blessing. Food provides sustenance, physical sustenance. We then thank God for the land from which we get the food. That there's enough rain to water our crops, that we have a good crop to make the food. Moving from the physical to the spiritual, we ask for the blessings for Jerusalem, that it be what its name indicates, a city of peace. And then we thank God for God's goodness. While food provides sustenance for our physical bodies, Torah provides sustenance for our neshamot, for our souls. The land of Israel represents opportunity to grow spiritually and intellectually. Israelites left Mitzrayim, land of Egypt. The Hebrew word Mitzrayim has the word tsar in the middle of it. Tsar means narrow. You left a place of narrowness, of small-mindedness, of enslavement. We made our way eventually to the land of potential and growth and openness. So while we give thanks for the physical land, we also give thanks for the idea that we can only receive our full sustenance of Torah, of enlightenment, in the land of potential and freedom. The capital, Jerusalem, symbolizes peace. The rabbis talk about two cities of Jerusalem. Yerushalayim Shal Mala, the heavenly Jerusalem, Yerushalayim Shal Mata, the physical, everyday Jerusalem. And the idea is that one day, Yerushalayim Shal Mata, Jerusalem from below, will converge with Yerushalayim Shal Mala, converge with Yerushalayim up above. And this mundane physical space will reach the spiritual heights of its potential to be a city of peace for all. And then we will be able to experience truly God's goodness. So we learn from this week's Torah portion, and we learn from reciting Birkat Hamazon after every meal, that you should pray for spiritual upliftment, nurturing of our souls through enlightenment and Torah, arriving at a place of freedom and potential, so we can fulfill our full potential as creatures created b'tselem Elohim, in God's image. That the Jerusalem that is wrought with fragmentation, with strife, with war, with bloodshed, will become the Yerushalayim of peace, of shalom, so you can experience God's goodness. Can you hear it, son? Amen.